In this video, we're going to look at one of the most significant periods in world history, World War I. So, if you're ready to get them brain cows milked, let's get to it. Okay, first up, why should you care about this war? Well, first off, this was truly a great war. The fighting involved almost every country in the world, and it completely transformed the global order. Old empires like the Ottoman, Russian, German, and Austro-Hungarian empires were dismantled, and new nations like Czechoslovakia, Poland, Hungary, Yugoslavia, and Estonia took their place. And then there are those pesky little details about the war ending with the Spanish flu pandemic, a worldwide flu pandemic that killed an estimated 50 million people in a global economic depression that led to the rise of extremist political movements like Nazism in Germany and fascism in Italy. Oh yeah, and by the way, this war also helped set the stage for the Second World War. Say that 5 times quickly. But enough about why you should care. Let's talk about the war itself. The story begins in 1914 with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary in Sarajevo. It's important to know that prior to this event, Europe was a powder keg just waiting to blow. There was a lot of nationalism and imperialism going around, not to mention a whole bunch of interlocking alliances. What happens when you mix nationalism, imperialism, and a bunch of alliances? Well, you get a war that will make your head explode. That's what. Anyway, after some serious diplomatic note-passing, the Austrians decided to declare war on Serbia. And because of those aforementioned alliances, pretty soon, the whole continent was fighting. There were 2 main sides, the Triple Entente, or the Allies, which included France, Russia, and Britain, and the Triple Alliance, or the Central Powers, which included Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Soon, the conflict spread beyond Europe and became truly global in scope. By the end of 1914, the Japanese had entered the war, fighting against the Germans in the Pacific. And in 1917, the United States would join the conflict, fighting alongside the British. Now, throughout the war, new technologies made their debut, including poison gas, tanks, airplanes, and the machine gun. But despite all the new tech, much of the fighting was characterized by gruesome trench warfare. Soldiers on both sides dug a series of trenches that stretched from one side of the Western Front to the other. And these trenches were no picnic. They were often crowded, dirty, and dangerous. And life on the front lines was especially hard. Their soldiers faced constant danger from the enemy, as well as artillery fire and poisonous gas. But still, despite the hardships, soldiers on both sides fought bravely and with great determination. Eventually, the Germans began to gain the upper hand, and in 1917, they launched a major offensive that nearly succeeded in breaking through the British and French lines. However, with the entry of the U.S. into the war, the tide began to turn. With the help of American troops, British and French were able to stop the German advance and eventually began pushing the Germans back. By the end of 1918, the Germans were exhausted and demoralized, and they soon began to lose the war. On November 11, 1918, the fighting ended with the signing of the Armistice of November. So now let's talk about the results of the war. First of all, the war had a major impact on Europe. As I mentioned earlier, many of the old empires were replaced with new nations. In addition, millions of European men had been killed or wounded, and the economies of many countries were in sharp decline. Not only that, but the war had a profound effect on art, literature, and culture. Many writers and artists of the period, such as Ernest Hemingway and T.S. Eliot, explored themes of disillusionment and despair in their work. This was a reaction to the senseless violence and destruction of the war. Finally, the war had a profound impact on the world stage. The United States emerged from the conflict as a major world power, while the global empires of Europe were severely weakened. In addition, the war had a major impact on the course of the 20th century. The harsh peace treaties imposed on Germany and other Central Powers created a climate of bitterness and resentment that would contribute to the rise of fascism and Nazism in the SES. Not to mention that a certain Austrian man who had been very interested in politics before the war, well, he was kicked out of power and went on to start his own political party. And let's just say things didn't end well for him. Okay, click here to keep reviewing for Unit 4, and thanks for watching.